Okay, good evening and welcome to our program. We are learning about medicine and halacha. And last time we gave this class, we spoke about an individual that how much is a person obligated to protect his life. And so we spoke about an individual that was diagnosed with the BRCA mutation. The BRCA mutation. And the question is, does this woman, does she have to go through a mastectomy to prevent further danger, God forbid? Does she have that obligation? So, on one hand, in stark contrast to secular law, there's no obligation whatsoever. As long as you're not harming other people, a person can do as they wish with their own life. However, like I said, in stark contrast to secular law, Jewish law explains the extreme opposite, that a Jewish person's life is not his life. It was given to him to maintain, to make sure it's healthy, and completely preserve his life. So, quoting Reb Shlomo Yosef Zevin, the authority of Reb Shlomo Yosef Zevin, I'll quote him. He says, in English, a person's life and body do not belong to him. Not only is it forbidden for a person to destroy his life, you're not allowed to destroy life, but it's not only that, it's not enough in whole or in part, but also his life does not belong to him in the first place. If he sells, gives away, or gives them pledge the flesh of his body to be chopped or diced or sliced, it is as if he had given away something it's not his. The transaction is invalid. God gives, when we say Le'aleinu, at a funeral we say Hashem Nasam, Hashem Lakach, God gives and God takes. It's not just a comforting cliche. It's not just a nice phrase, but a definition of reality. This is all Shlomo Yosef Zevin. According to Jewish law, the agreement between Shylock and Antonio is null and void to begin with. Even if extracting a slice of living flesh would not endanger the life of the giver, it's still not allowed. It's still void. How much more so when there's no assurance that it would not result in death or in at least serious injury. So obviously, the point is a person's life is not his, and therefore he has the obligation not only not to destroy, he has the obligation to preserve it. We say in the famous Jewish prayer, we say in the Slichot prayer, every time we say Slichot, especially before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we say, Aguf Shalach, that the neshama is God's and the body is God's handiwork, and He gives it to us to preserve and to make sure to keep it at the healthiest possible state. We'll quote a couple of more texts to underscore this concept that our body is not ours, and we have the obligation to maintain it in complete health. And then we'll have to balance soon between what type of risks are allowed and what types of risks are not allowed, because walking out of your house, getting into a car, also automatically involves risk. So we have to understand which risks are acceptable, which risks are unacceptable. But in the meantime, we want to underscore first that the body is not ours, and we have the obligation to preserve it, which, from this perspective, from this side of the coin, we're not permitted to take any risks. So, according to the code of Jewish law, it is forbidden to hit another person, even with the other person's consent. A person has no authority over his body to grant permission that it be struck, denigrated, or pained. It's not yours to begin with. According to the code of Jewish law. And so from here up to here, I'm just going to summarize. We see how we have to preserve life. We'll get back to the BRCA mutation or the BRCA gene later on. That's what we're trying to understand. We're trying to discern whether we have the obligation to monitor it, or have the obligation to. Does everyone have an obligation to check if they have it? Do have an obligation to, if one is diagnosed with it, do they have to go through a mastectomy and so on and so forth? So just to summarize, in the eyes of Jewish law, we do not have an ownership claim over our bodies. The body was placed in our trust for the duration of our physical lives, and it is our duty to preserve it and be diligent about its health. So at this point, we can't take any risks. But at the same time, telling someone to avoid all risks is as reasonable as telling someone to live forever. Risks are inherent in the human condition, and one cannot avoid them. You can't avoid risks entirely. Playing sports, traveling, all these things somehow create some sort of risk to a certain degree. So it almost seemed like a person would not be permitted to travel, wouldn't be permitted to play sports. So we have to have a balance. So we now turn to the Talmud to see the definition of what is considered reasonable risk and what's unreasonable risks. So let's look at the following Talmudic texts, and we'll see if this is the Jerusalem Talmud Yerushalmi in Brachot, reads as follows: Kol hadrachim v'cheskas sakana. All roads are presumed to be dangerous. Kol hadrachim v'cheskas sakana. And it says, and it goes on to say, Rabbi Yonah can have a nafik la'achsanya, have a mifakid gebeisa. Rabbi Yonah would leave a will before traveling. Rabbi Mana would leave a will before going to the heated bathhouse. The bathhouse was a wooden bathhouse, and it was heated with fire. So if he went to the bathhouse that was heated with flames, he would write a will. And Rab Mana and Rab Yena, if he traveled, he would leave a will. So that's one Talmudic text. Let's read another Talmudic text. Talmud Bavli in Bava Metzia, Tractate Bava Metzia, page 112. It reads as follows. It quotes the verse which in Deuteronomy it says "Ve'elov hu neses nafshei," which speaks about the obligation to give your employee his wages on time, because he is poor and he sets his life upon you. Ve'elov hu neses nafshei. He's setting his eyes and his life upon you. What does that mean? What does it mean that this individual is putting his life upon you? It's a very interesting way of explaining that the person needs his wages. The person needs his wages. What does it mean? He sets his life upon you. And the Talmud explains, why did he ascend a ladder or suspend himself from a tree and risk death? Was it not that you should pay his wages? another Talmudic text. I'm going to read one more text and I'll explain what we're trying to get at. There's a famous Talmudic text in again in Tractate Brachot in Talmud Bavli. It says there are 4 classes of people who have to offer thanksgiving to Hashem. Who are the 4 classes of people, 4 types of people? Those have crossed the sea, traveled through the wilderness, recovered from an illness, and set free from prison. But let's speak about the first 2. Those who travel across the sea, or travel through the desert, they have to give thanksgiving to Hashem. So we have 3 Talmudic texts who mention Rabbi Yena used to travel, he used to leave a will before he traveled, because he says that everywhere you go is dangerous. So it doesn't say because everywhere you go is dangerous, that's why don't go. You're not allowed to travel. It's not what it says. It says he left a will, but it doesn't say he did any violation of law. And similarly, this individual who's risking his life, so he's climbing a ladder or suspending himself from a tree, it doesn't say he's not allowed to. It says that he's doing these risks in order to get paid. And similarly, these individuals, these classes of people who travel through the desert and across the sea, they have to give thanksgiving to Hashem. But it doesn't say that they're not allowed to engage in those actions. So how do you reconcile? On one hand, we say a person shouldn't take risks. On the other hand, a person that takes risks has to give thanksgiving to Hashem. How can this be reconciled with the aforementioned obligation to preserve one's life? So, quoting a renowned authority, a halachic authority who lived about 150 years ago, Rabbi Aryeh Leibush of Volcho. It's Belarus, I believe. So he explains as follows. One may perform dangerous activities if they are crucial to the operation of the world. The Talmud states that 4 people must offer thanks to God, 2 of them being a sea traveler and a desert traveler. Evidently, there's no prohibition to engage in dangerous activities that society requires. So here he's giving the caveat, explaining this a little bit, making a balance that there's certain dangers that a person either has no need to, or the society has no need for that danger, that you're not allowed to engage in. But if it's a danger, again, there's going to be other qualifications and requirements that allow. But at this point, we're speaking about certain types of dangers that are required for the person needs to, or society needs it. He's saying right now, evidently there's no prohibition to engage in dangerous activities that society requires. I'll speak about it in a minute. So too, anything else that is dangerous but necessary for global development, such as war, is permitted. And then he goes on to explain even further. Although a woman has no religious obligation to bear children, it is not forbidden for her, and it's not a mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah on the husband to have children, but can't have children without his wife. But nonetheless, she can say, I don't have an obligation to bear children. Why should I put my life in danger? But there's no prohibition for that, despite the risks. And there's even no prohibition for her to put her life at risk to bear children, even if she already has children. Why? Because this is the way of the world. I'll speak in a minute how God gave us the world, and He commanded us to develop the world in all different in societal ways, and simply bringing upon the next generation, multiply and be fruitful. So at the same, even though there's risk involved, Hashem did put us in a position and an obligation to preserve the world and develop the world. Likewise, there are many unsafe endeavors that are indispensable to a functioning society and therefore permitted. So here, Rabbi Aryeh Leibush, a noted authority who lived 150 years ago, gave the qualification, explained that there's certain dangers that are considered a necessity for the development of the world. And since it's a necessity for the development of the world, those dangers are permitted to be engaged in with, as we'll see soon, with other qualifications or requirements. But that's one qualification or requirement. So just going back and quoting the Genesis, once Hashem created Adam and Eve, and Hashem told us, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the sky, and over all the beasts that tread upon the earth. So in this pasuk, in this passage, this verse, Hashem vests humanity with the task of building, planting, mining, and developing the world, even if it entails some sort of risk. So what we're discerning from here is that one is allowed and even encouraged to engage in activities that are indispensable to a functioning world. Unavoidable risks taken in pursuit of one's livelihood, traveling by air, traveling by car, working in coal mines. All these are not only permitted; they're encouraged. So now the question is, does this mean that one can engage in any risky activity as long as it qualifies as being a personal or societal necessity? So here we're going to see that there's another qualification that's required. So even the answer is no. And as the authority, the Shem Ari cites another Talmudic passage that forbade to travel by sea during certain times when it's too dangerous. There's a huge storm, and so on and so forth. So our mandate from God is to settle the earth. That mandate permits us to engage in conduct that, although risky, is a necessary part of everyday living and integral to a functioning society. So now, the question is, so we understand that you're allowed to engage in certain risks that are a necessity for a functioning society. But what happens if I want to play sports? If I want to travel for leisure? Decided to go on a vacation and engaging in many activities that do constitute some sort of risk. It would seem from here that those would be not allowed. We're saying that those are a necessity for a person's, for the development of society or for his livelihood, that perhaps is allowed. But what if I want to engage in leisure? Travel for business, travel for livelihood is permitted, but travel for leisure, to go on a vacation, or to play sports, or to engage in other activities that are just leisure, but they are risky, it would almost seem that that's not allowed. However, even that's not the case. As we see, we have again another Talmudic text which will explain that a person is allowed to engage in other activity as well, even if it's risky. But what is the qualification? What's the requirement? So the Talmud in Tractate Yevamot explains as follows. During Talmudic times, bloodletting was believed to be a human necessity. It was a common practice. However, the Talmud says one should not let blood on a cloudy or windy day. There's some hazards involved. And then the Talmud concludes with a very, very interesting statement. The Talmud says, now, however, when many people trample upon this directive, then you can rely on the fact that it says, Shemer Psayim Hashem, God will protect the innocent. So it doesn't say because this is a necessity, so you can do it in a hazardous time. It says because people trample upon it. So this led halachic experts to assert that one is allowed to engage in activities that entail risk to life, even if they do not qualify as human or societal necessities, if many people trample on this risk, meaning that the population thinks nothing of this danger. In other words, it could be officially there could be danger associated with this thing, but it's so rare, as we'll see, and because it's rare, people, in other words, the Talmud made the statement that people trample on it, but in the same breath, we're assuming that why do people trample on it? Because it's so rare. So because it's rare, this led authorities to believe that it's okay. I mean, the Talmud said it. The Talmud said because populace, the people trample on that type of concern, meaning they don't pay much attention to it, and understanding the reason why don't people pay attention to it, because it's a rare occurrence. There's an important caveat. According to the consensus of halachic experts, this is only true if the actual risk of death is very low. And that which would explain why people trample on it. So I guess the risk of danger in general is certainly low. But not only is the risk of danger low, even the risk of not only is the risk of death extremely low, even the risk of danger is low. So because it's such a rare risk of danger, and it's obviously a very, very rare risk of death, that also constitutes permission to take that type of risk. And this will explain why you're allowed to get into your car and go for a road trip and things like that, or even travel for leisure and travel for pleasure. Quoting the Rabbi Chaim Ezer Gordzinski, I'm sorry. He says the sages were not concerned about infrequent risks. In such cases, one can engage in activity and have confidence on the verse Shemer Psayim Hashem, God will protect the innocent. And this Rabbi Chaim Ezer Gordzinski invokes a category of halachic probability called miyut she'enei matzui. Miyut means it's a minority, and Misha'eni Motzi means it's very rare. It's a minority. It happens so seldom to such a minority amount of people. At the same time, it's an extremely rare. I guess it's one and the same. It's Eni In other words, Miyut Eni means it's extremely rare. Not only does it it's rare, but it not as rare. Miyut Eni means it's a minority that's so un it's not Eni literally means it's not found. It's not found. It's not common. So just to summarize what we've learned so far, even if not a necessity, first we began saying that if it's a necessity for a person's livelihood or a necessity for societal development, that type of risk is allowed to. Here we add a greater novelty that even if it's not a necessity, one may engage in those activities that pose very infrequent risk if the wider public has altogether ignored the risk. In other words, one and the same. Why would the wider public ignore the risk? Because it's so infrequent. It is not always simple to determine which risks are indeed ignored by the wider public, but that's getting into the very detail. The rule, at least we have the rule. The rule is that it's very infrequent. What's considered infrequent? How much is infrequent? How much percent? They say if it's not of a life-threatening danger, then it's has to be less than 10%. If it's life-threatening danger, if it's 3%, it's already too much to engage in that type of risk. Something to that effect, but that's already very detailed and depending on different authorities. So far, we've seen that on one hand, we have the obligation to guard our lives and to avoid risks. On the other hand, we have seen that Jewish law allows one to assume risks that it deems to be reasonable and not reckless. The point is that you could take a reckless risk. You're certainly not allowed to take. Um, we'll conclude here for today, and we'll continue next week on explaining another fundamental aspect on what do we base this concept that the balance, so to speak. It has to have a certain fundamental halachic aspect to balance out. On one hand, you're saying not a lot of risk. A person not allowed to risk his life in danger. On the other hand, certain things are allowed to. So we're saying we quote the verse Shemer P'sei Hashem that Hashem protects the innocent. But again, when does that apply? And that type of detail we continue in Mitzvah Hashem in the future.